Wake up, buy here, pay here people. It's a beautiful day. Go grab yourself another cup of joe and say hello to Jim and Michelle Rhodes on the Buy Here, Pay Here morning show. Take it away, you two.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello. Is it time to do the morning show again?
It's like afternoon kind of here, but yeah, it is. Maybe it feels like it's afternoon because we did one yesterday for the FIADA address.
So wasn't the morning show, but
it wasn't the morning show, but it was a live broadcast. So yeah, it was a great show. Another, like, every time we go to one of those, I just really appreciate how nice it is to connect with people. So,
sure.
Yeah.
No, for sure. It's always good to, see colleagues and have a chance to chat with the people that we don't see often enough. And so, talk to them on the phone's fine, but to just be in the room with them and maybe even share a cocktail. And,
yeah, we did.
So some of you saw
we found a smoked old fashioned.
It was quite a presentation.
It was. Yeah. It was very similar to the one at TAIDA.
And I got to tell you,
TIADA. Did I say that
you said it right? Good,
okay,
good. So our friend and colleague Todd Yates over at Primal End was teasing me about don't fall for all the hype. It's just smoke and whatever. And I was thinking later, I was like, it was quite a sensory experience. It's not, you get the flavor, you get the scent, the whole visual element is great.
But I mean, I think after the smoke has gone away, it doesn't really, don't keep a smoke flavor, but there really is, anyone who has been a bartender understands that what you smell as you drink changes your experience.
Right. Yeah.
So it's, you get a different experience the first few sips at least. Yeah. So good morning, both Tyler and to Karen. Glad to have you.
And we didn't bring you guys here to talk about cocktails this morning. It's a little early for that.
It is. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, but we just a couple quick announcements. We have a webinar coming up at the end of the month that's going to be about branding and not about the logo and the color scheme and all of that. This is going to be about who people see you as and your dealership, and we're going to start doing some diving into that kind of question. We talked a little bit about it yesterday.
Story. Yeah, we did touch on that yesterday. And so Troy Shear from NIADA will join. He's super bright, obviously, when it comes to marketing. He's a director of marketing. And then Dave Murray from our team will also join. He's got a great background in marketing and storytelling himself. So it'll be good. Yeah, it'll be fun. And then good morning, Bill Elizondo.
And then I don't know who the Facebook user is Sell the Program, Not the Car, and uploaded the picture of the chicken sandwich.
Oh, nice. Everyone's asking about it. Yeah, so we got to find that chicken sandwich photo. So just for those who didn't catch it yesterday, our broadcast yesterday was on the subject of sell the program, not the car. And then we featured a couple of different things. We talked about Southwest Airlines. We talked about Chick-fil-A. It's kind of been a thing that everybody can relate to because they've either been in that line or they've driven by and seen the long lines at Chick-fil-A, so everybody can understand that. But yeah, from a marketing standpoint.
Well, and you brought up the whole Southwest thing because, all of us, we're aware if you watch anything on the news that there is a bit of a hiccup with the company and, put a lot of people in a place where they were a little bit uncomfortable, but they have created enough of a brand loyalty.
Yeah.
Because the brand itself has seen people through so many great times and they've been very, very consistent.
Right.
And so, even in dealerships, same basic thing that when you create a brand that people really can just feel good about it all the time, then if you have something come along that's a little bit of a hiccup, a bad review, whatever it is, good morning, Carlos, you have a better opportunity of being able to overcome that easily.
Sure. Yeah, it's good stuff. So, I think, it was a good conversation. We had a good room, good attendance yesterday. And then, of course, our online audience was tuned in. And so it was, it was good session. But so we have the session coming up again on January 31st. That's a Tuesday night. We're going to do another 7:30 Eastern webinar.
We'll be diving a little bit deeper into the topic that we talked about yesterday. And then just so you guys know, in February, we're going to be doing a master class and working with just a very small handful of dealers one-on-one, taking them deeper into this. We're also going to have some group classes that dealers, if they don't want to do the one-on-one, can participate that way as well, and just see some of the high level things that we're going to be teaching. The one-on-one is more about getting working with the dealers themselves about their dealership and helping them define their message, so that we're kind of going to be working with them more than just the general, if dealers just want to be able to watch and absorb some of the information that we're going to be talking about. So
so for today we want to talk about debt in business, and wow, thinking about this topic in recent conversations, both with dealer clients and with some of our colleagues out there, lenders, people, capital providers in the space, it just is, there's like multiple facets of the conversation. And so in choosing kind of where to go with today, we kind of chose for today to really talk mostly about debt, because we've had some client conversations recently where dealers are a little bit averse to debt. They don't come from debt. They were educated not to use debt. So debt on a personal nature is one thing.
Well, yes. And so I think the first thing to differentiate, and it's, we all have heard so many times, those, many of us, that debt is not good, to stay out of debt, the scary things about debt. And, that I can think of a boatload of different memes about, you go to bed, dad's sitting there waiting for you to wake up in the morning, that, it's balling, all these different things. And so we've been taught a lot growing up. And I can think about, myself personally, that debt is not a good thing. I remember as a kid and as a young adult, Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey, and all of the things. It's like debt bad, cut up the credit cards, debt bad, and we're part of what we've been talking about is that there's a difference between personal debt and business debt. And so first off, to separate those two things, and I think the Rich Dad Poor Dad, I can't think it was because it's what's his last name? Kiyosaki. I mean, he talks a little bit about that too, and that debt used wisely is what most very successful businesses have done.
Yeah. And I didn't get a chance to throw a poll out there. I had about 3 different polls on my mind this morning, and I put one out for today, and I scheduled another one for tomorrow, but there's even a third one that's really about, it would be interesting to know what percentage of dealers that, might take this poll, what percentage of them are operating with some form of external money, whether it's in the form of debt, or whether it's an investment, and often debt can come, investment can come as equity or debt, typically, but just, did they fund it themselves? I mean, the percentage of buy here, pay here dealers that we meet that are fully self-funded, that's a pretty low number. That's a pretty low percentage. So, we put the poll out there. There's some out there.
There are out there.
But most dealers can't build a very large business that way. And so what becomes the question, I think, is how much debt is a sensible amount of debt in business? There's lots of ways to think about that. But some of the conversations we've had with lenders, I think what becomes a question is, what can I do with debt? If I did access some smart money, some smart debt.
Because it can be a tool, a really valuable tool. And by no means are we implying that that you should get into debt, or that it's that you're doing it wrong if you haven't gone into debt at all. But it's about how do you use it as a good tool?
And obviously you can find a mentor on this and talk to some others in making that decision. But I think for me, if I were just starting a buy here, pay here dealership, or I were, advising someone who's starting whatever, then, I would be prepared. And when we do advise dealers to be prepared to take on some smart capital, you're going to need to fund your business. And we would rather see dealers, generally speaking, where the smart money is available. Let's try to, move that.
Yes,
we got a little bit of buzzing and a little bit of feedback on our side. So bottom line is we're trying to get to the place where we can help dealers grow. And so that's really often the question for me is, I think, in making a judgment about when is the right time to bring in external funding, Well, if we're talking about investor partners, then that can make sense from day one. If it's the right kind of partnership structure and the right kind of investment, then that can make sense right out of the gate. With debt, I mean, most lenders won't step in until you have a little bit of track record, especially if you're going to be the one collecting and remitting the funds to them. They're going to see that you have a little bit of history and success in collecting, in this particular space before they would provide funding. I would feel the same if I were making loans to new dealers. So there's those kind of things to think about. But I think what we're really suggesting is that most dealers, the nature of buy here, pay here, is that it's going to take some external funding to enjoy the kind of volume that is possible in most markets.
Well, I enjoy the conversations with dealers when we get into these kind of subjects and just hearing about their experience and their story and one of them was asking, so do you if someone were new, would you encourage debt or encourage them to do a little bit of lending? And I think that part of what we were talking, like one of the highlights is that for dealers that have been in the business for 10, 20, 30 years, it was a different landscape then than it is now.
True.
And so it's a little bit, there's a little bit more challenge today than there was 10 years ago, to being able to do it without any assistance, because that same 250,000, 500,000, whatever it is that you entered the business with took you a lot further.
Yeah.
Than that same amount of money does today. And how many people do we say, it's like, if you're getting into buy here, pay here, how much money do you need?
It's a big number. I mean,
it's a big number.
It's a duty volume. I mean, we can choose to go slow growth. And I think that's, as you and I talked about, it's like, that's one of the challenges is, you could choose to do organic growth only. We see some dealers do that, build up very slowly. If you got a retail business too, and you're selling some cars cash, or you otherwise have another stream of income, then that's one thing. But if you're really just focusing on your buy here, pay here business, then the way I think about it is, it's like if you open your dealership tomorrow and you got a chance to finance 20 customers a month because of the traffic that you see, and you get qualified applicants in, but you can only afford to fund 5 of them, then to me, that missed opportunity, it's just a real exaggerated example. It's like, in a simplistic example, if I'm missing business opportunity, then what's keeping me from accessing external funding to take on that? If it's a smart deal, it fits my program, it fits the underwriting model that I set up for myself. If
the customers coming in,
Right.
It's something that fits, but you don't take it because you don't
have the cash.
You don't have the cash.
So it's like the cost of money might be high, but what's the cost of the missed opportunity? I think that's something that, in a business class, one of the early things you would learn is opportunity costs. And, it's a challenging thing to calculate, but in reality, one example that I gave is probably not the best example, but I, in talking about it before the show, I said, if you think about, you buy an apartment building and it's got 100 units in it, but they need to be refurbished. So, but you have enough capital to refurbish 30 of them, but you have enough applicants come forward to be able to rent
70 of them.
Whatever, a much higher number. It's like, the building is there. Like, why wouldn't we access some external funding
to be able to
enjoy that revenue? Like, and then the math, you just have to do the math. It's a math problem, really, and so you have to just make a judgment of whether that makes sense. So, in our case, in buy here, pay here, we have different kind of assets. We have kind of soft assets. Yes, the car is out there as collateral. I don't think of the car as primary collateral. I think of the car as secondary collateral. I think as primary collateral is the note itself. And the reason I think that is because of long history with cash flow and knowing what kind of yield on cash that the portfolios typically generate. So this is part of what I really need to record something for the sake of some of our clients, that because I've been in many meetings over the years with clients and their would-be lenders or business partners, lending partners.
It happens all the time.
Yeah. And so when you have those conversations, like there's parts of that I share with, just like what we're talking about here, I think of the car as secondary collateral. Some lenders out there would want to know the book value of the car. Book value of the car matters very little to me if I'm the lender, but everybody's got their own thing, right? And so I'm not the lender for our dealers. So, but I'm just saying that's the way I think about it. After years of watching the numbers and buy here, pay here, we just know a portfolio of X in size should generate about Y in capital monthly, in cash flow. And so that's the way I think about. That's what I'd be lending against, is that.
Yeah.
So when we think about debt, I'm thinking you have to look at what's a sensible ratio. Well, there's lots of different answers on that. It has a lot to do with what kind of loan structure you're doing.
I don't think I've ever been a part of like business strategy, business development conversations in my career that I don't think I've ever experienced so many, well, it depends answers.
Yeah. Yeah. I get the answer.
There's so many. It's like, it just depends. What's your model? What kind of, and it's a different paradigm in buy here, pay here. And so there are a lot of depends, but aren't there some things that, as we've talked to different clients, there are a few things that if you can measure by a couple of different metrics, that regardless of your the way that you do business, the kind of car that you if you can keep within these things, then you run a better risk.
Yeah. So among those things that I think you're referring to would be things like your debt ratio, the actual leverage against your assets or the receivables is most common. As you get a line of credit, you're typically going to get some sort of limit on a percentage of your receivables, which is appropriate.
Yeah. And there are, we've witnessed there are a lot of lenders out there that are willing to lend more than what we would suggest our clients lend to, or leverage to.
And listen, as a coach advisor, it's uncomfortable for us to see dealers, stepping. We used to be able to try to keep it around 40-45% of receivables. Well, as cost of cars gone up, markup has come down relative to cost percentage wise. So the leverage that's required now is a little bit different. Does that make it wrong? No, it just means you got a little less room for error. So you're going to have to be smart. You have to work really closely with your lender and make sure you feel comfortable with the people that you're sourcing the money from, and make sure that they have your success in mind. And now you create a balance that makes sense, because we are probably having to borrow more. We're taking on more debt, which again takes away some margin for error. And so that's the dangerous thing with debt. We got to make sure we stay in a safe ratio.
So what would you say, like, what kind of a line would you cross with your percentages where you're like, you're stepping into dangerous waters?
Well, let me say it this way. And I don't want to step on the toes of any of our would-be lenders out there that are, many of them are people we know well, but I would just say that if I were working with a client, I think your question is, if I were working with a client, I would need to really have some justification for drawing more than 50% of the note balance. Now, can it be done? Higher ACV cars, 65% can work. But if I'm advising a client, if we're going to cross above 50% of the receivables, I need to understand why. Like, I just would want to go inside that, because that to me is where, and we saw it. We actually modeled it out with a client. I shared it on the morning show months ago that we actually modeled it out with a client on a couple things. Ken Shilson, we talked about this morning. Ken Shilson is pioneer in this industry. Somebody's done a ton for standardization. He's a CPA by education and trade, and certainly has as deep a financial understanding of this segment as anybody out there. And Ken challenged dealers years ago to say, go back to your dealerships and run the numbers and see if something happened and your rate of charge-offs were to double, would you still be in business? Let's think about that. I'm going to say it again. Ken would say, go back and run the math and look at if your charge-offs doubled in the next year, what would that do to your business? That's
a really great measuring stick, because it doesn't matter what your model is, but if that were, that's like worst case scenario in your business for whatever reason.
And when we say, would you still be in
storm,
business? Yeah. Well, when we say, would you still be in business? It's like, could you still support your debt? could you still stay in a
Mm-hmm.
favorable ratio and stay within covenants on your line of credit, as an example,
Mm-hmm.
at that ratio? And so what we modeled out, the part I talked about, is some months ago we were modeling with a dealer on the screen,
Mm-hmm.
and we did that example, we did that exercise on a single screen. We changed the advance rate on his potential line of credit from 50% to 65%.
Mm-hmm.
At 50% advance rate, he was still fine at 50%, even with a double charge off experience. But at 65%, he was getting underwater. He was getting out of ratio. He was getting,
Mm-hmm.
out of covenants with the line of credit. That's a recipe for disaster. If you start falling behind your
Mm-hmm.
ratios and you're having to come up with curtailments and cash to keep that in favor, that's a dangerous mix. So this is why, these lenders out there, they have a ton of experience, got a ton of their own data. I just know that as an advisor for our dealers, we just want to see, and look, 50% is challenging. I mean, it depends on obviously what you get for the down payment. If you get $3,000 down from a customer, you probably make 50% work just fine.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're seeing what most of our dealers are seeing, then that's a tougher deal to make it work. And we want to see dealers. I would recommend to any dealer, it's okay to take debt against earning assets.
Mm-hmm.
When dealers start to talk to me about, I need more cash, I need to draw more because of my overhead. Wait a minute, we're borrowing money to support overhead. You don't have the means to support your overhead.
That is,
besides debt, you're
yeah,
borrowing to pay
yeah.
overhead.
Well, and that's, I think, just from an outside perspective is, it's one thing to double your charge-offs because that's something that happens in the industry. That's like an industry trend or something like that. Your overhead is so much more in your complete control. And so if you're having a hard time meeting your overhead, it's the same thing as like, well, I get paid $4,000 from my boss every month and I spend 4,500. So it looks like I just need to cut back. It's not, or find a new job or something like that. But it's like, that's kind of one of those things of your overhead is living within your means. And that, we see frequently with dealers that's, we don't typically go in and say yes or no to different overhead pieces, but as we start talking about what are your things that you are spending on your overhead, there are a few times that we to ourselves just take pause and go, I hope that works.
Well, and so of course our lender partners out there, lender friends, they see this, like they see dealers, and we've had those conversations where you'll see dealer who, and this is not just our business. I mean, it happens in lots of industries, but where a dealer is borrowing, for example, some sum of money and they're supporting it, but there are lots of things in their P&L that aren't necessarily directly related to operation of their buy here, pay here business. They have additional expenses on their P&L that aren't related to operation of that business. So whatever that looks like, it's just now it's getting challenging because now we do have to borrow more to make it all work. And now we're getting in a ratio problem with the what we borrow relative to the liquid value of the receivables, the market value. If something happened, we need to liquidate, then you would want to support that debt in doing that. And there's lots of other things lenders look at. I think for our purposes here today, we were just trying to say, look, it's not uncommon. In fact, it's most common for dealers to use some sort of external capital to fund their business, whether that's, and I'm not talking about selling paper. That's a whole different conversation. I'm talking about funding the contracts that they're going to own and keep on their own balance sheet. For today, that's really what I was thinking about. And so most dealers are using some sort of external funding to do that. And that's okay. It can all work just great. And the lenders can make some money and you can make some money and the customer can get the car that they need, So it can all still work just great, but there's some things we need to watch and this just leads me into the part of the reason I was struggling about which part of this we want to talk about is because, as you know, I'm looking forward to taking on in 2023 this whole thing about deal structure, like the deal structure, which will include the loan structure and how the financing that we get externally influences our ability to do the deal structure that we might like to do. So I think we want to talk about all of it. And again, it's not suggesting capital is a bad thing. External capital is a necessary thing often, But it's like, how do we make that all work and still do the volume that we need to do? And when I say need to do, I'm simply saying, and there's some stuff I record out there on what I call the volume formula. There's a need to do a certain volume. We need to create a certain number. And I mean, need, like mathematically, there's some basis for creating a certain amount of volume. And if we don't, then the model's not going to work so great. And we need to probably look at being in the dry cleaning business instead.
Yeah, I know, like, when Jim does the profit cash flow forecasting for someone who's thinking about getting into the business, and there's a graph that he uses that it's like, you want to get to this point first, which is where your overhead is being taken care of by car sales, and then the next big milestone is where the replacement of inventory is getting taken care of through the payments that are coming in.
Right.
Yeah. And so I would love to maybe even do a morning show kind of on that and talk a little bit more about those two milestones, because it's always a good idea for you, for a dealer to, it's like, okay, we need to get to here. It's funny because milestones, I could squirrel on that one. Milestones for a lot of dealers is like, so where are you at right now? Well, I've got, I make 40 sales a month and I want to get to 60. So it's like, well, why? What's the milestone? What does it mean? So these are really very distinct milestones that you talk about covering overhead, covering cost of car, boom.
Yeah. And there's some real math involved. And I'm simply saying, sourcing external money can make sense. It does make sense in lots of situations. There are lots of providers out there, and we're headed into an interesting time. 2023 is a time we're going to have a lot of adjustment, post-COVID. Car prices are hopefully going to stabilize, but we're still much higher. We probably won't see pre-COVID prices anytime soon, if ever. So like, there's a lot of adjustment, and there's some concern about the market conditions, like the economy itself and inflation and a lot of those things. So
it's unprecedented.
It's unprecedented in some way.
Really
You've got kind of a mix of things happening now, but the reality is it's an important time to be smart. There's going to be tons of opportunity for the dealers who you can get in here, but we just need to make sure we're smart about the capital that we use, and that we create assets that have value and that perform well. And so, nothing that we're suggesting is go borrow to the hilt and, create lots of sales. That's
so I kind of what you've said. I take, like, my takeaway is there's two main things, two main points to be watchful of as a dealer. One is trying to keep it under the 50%, because if you doubled your charge-offs, would you be able to stay, would you put you underwater, or would you be okay? And that 50%, usually if you do that you're going to be okay, even with a doubled charge-off. So the first one is the 50%. The second one is if you can't stay ahead of the game at 50%, look at your overhead.
Yeah. Definitely overhead's going to be a thing, because if, again, we're just borrowing against the earning assets, then we hope that combination generates enough cash that we can support our overhead, would be my recommendation. When we go and look at the numbers, we want to make sure we generate enough. And lenders would look at things like debt service coverage ratio. So are you generating enough cash to cover the debt associated with this portfolio? So there are lots of things they would look at. We don't, in our position, we don't have to think about that in the same way, but we to the extent we're advising a dealer and they're borrowing, then obviously we have to operate within that framework. And so that's all part of what we try to do.
I think, just from those two things, I know we've talked to or watched a lot of conversation with people. It's like, I want to be able to get this much and I want to be able to get this much. And so they're chasing down where they can get the most amount of money for the loan. And that's just not a wise place to put yourself.
Yeah. We just got to be careful. It's a concern for me, and it's probably a concern for lender when we're trying to just borrow the max, to get up, because that just puts us in it takes away that margin for error that we talk about. And so we don't want to see, our clients and dealers end up in that place, and then neither do the lenders.
Yeah.
So we just want to make sure that we, create a successful formula, create some balance that can make sense. I think generally what we want to talk about today is that external debt is common and can be highly successful. Smart money can be highly useful, and it can help to create a successful model, which gives us an appropriate amount of growth so that we can, because organic growth is fine. It's just that mathematically it may make sense to grow at a little faster clip. And so this is where we would find an advisor, find a mentor, and make a judgment of whether that makes sense for you, because we do think there's going to be a lot of business opportunity for our buy here, pay here folks out there in 2023.
Yeah.
So it's a question of, is it time to step in there and access some smart money and grow our business and be ready to take on some smart deals. So that's what we wanted to have a chance to talk about. Karen says, you're taking us to church. So yeah. So yeah, big amen from Karen.
Amen.
So, yeah.
All right.
Good.
Anything else on that front?
No, I think that's plenty. I think
Okay.
I would just remind our viewers and listeners. I used to say listeners, but now they're actually looking at us.
Yeah, I know, right?
They're watching
it's
us on the screen.
nice. So, in a way, I've gotten used to it.
Yeah, have
a
you?
little bit. Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So no, it's all good. We appreciate folks tuning in, and we'll talk to you again on Monday morning.
Excellent. Have a great weekend, everybody. And when we talk to you on Monday, likely we'll be back in Guyman, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So we'll see you all later. Thanks so much for joining us today.